Good evening, brethren. Welcome to another Wednesday night Bible study. If you'll bow your heads, we'll go ahead and ask a blessing on this Bible study. Father in heaven, we come before you now as a spiritual family and give you thanks and praise and honor and glory. Appreciate the opportunity to study your word and to learn more about you and the way of life that you've called us to, Father. We ask your blessing upon this Bible study, upon our hearing, our understanding, and our learning. We commit the study into your hands and pray this through Jesus Christ's name. Amen. So last couple of feasts, I've been assigned to talk to the teen group, and one of the subjects that we've talked about is the subject of integrity. It's a very difficult subject for young people today. They're battling integrity all the time, and so they really need to understand what it is and what are the forces that work against it and so forth. And I thought it might make a good Bible study this week to kind of go through this subject of integrity, and I want to begin with a story. The story is from I pulled it out of the New York Times, written by Vimal Patel. This was written on October 2nd. And I saw this story during the feast, or just before the feast this year, and I thought it was fascinating. Headline is, Fishing Contest Rocked by Cheating Charges After Weights Found in Winning Catches. Tagline, 2 competitors stuffed walleye with lead balls in a scheme that was caught after the tournament director and attendees grew suspicious. Jason Fisher became suspicious when the 5 fish he estimated to be about 4 pounds each, or 20 pounds total, weighed in at nearly 34 pounds. Attendees at a fishing tournament in Cleveland on Friday also had doubts. No way, one man said. Mr. Fisher, the director of the tournament, known as the Lake Erie Walleye Trail, or LEWT. I don't know if they say that LOOT, as an abbreviation for what that is, but that's a very well-known fishing tournament. It happens multiple times during the year. The Lake Erie Walleye Trail inspected one of the walleye and felt a hard object in its stomach that seemed unnatural. It's not like they're eating rocks, he said. He grabbed a knife and sliced open the fish as Jacob Runyon, one member of the 2-person team that presented it for weighing, looked on. The next moments rocked the competitive fishing world. "We got weights in fish," Mr. Fisher shouted, holding up an egg-sized lead ball he plucked from the fish in a dramatic moment captured on video posted online. He then spoke directly to Mr. Runyon as if he were an enraged umpire ejecting an unruly player. "Get out of here," he shouted, interjecting the demand with an expletive. He was very unhappy because this is a tournament worth a lot of money. And so we've got 2 guys cheating. He was very unhappy. And on the video that I saw, he was using expletives. Members of the crowd, I'll continue here, members of the crowd accused the men of theft and demanded that the police be called. Mr. Runyon and his teammate, Chase Kaminsky, would have finished in first place and scored a prize of about $30,000. But they were disqualified after the lead ball, and subsequently several others were discovered in the fish, Mr. Fisher said. The 2 fishermen are suspected of cheating in the 3 previous Lake Erie events held earlier this year, reaping thousands of dollars in winnings. As I talk to my grandkids, as I talk to the teens this year at the feast in Branson, as I talked to the teens last year in Bend, Oregon, integrity matters. Here's a good example. You're in good faith out there competing in this fishing tournament, and you're expecting that everybody else is, and you're competing for money, a legitimate prize. And here are 2 people who, it looks like, have won previous tournaments because they cheated. You don't have a chance when somebody's cheating, do you? Unless somebody catches them, as was the case in this tournament. And of course, these 2 men are in deep trouble because of that. But how do we have a world that functions in any reasonable way when we have cheating? One of the things that I did with our kids is I talked to them I've talked to them about a sport that helps to illustrate the importance of integrity, and that sport is golf. In Bend, we went out and we did some putt-putt golf, and in all golf, whether it's putt-putt or whether it's on a real golf course, whether it's for play or whether it's in a tournament, golfers keep their own scores. In putt-putt golf, somebody will finish putting and you'll ask them, well, what was your score? And then you'll write that score. If there's one scorekeeper, you'll write that score down. And we trust that person gave us an accurate score. And of course, depending on the competitive nature of teens, that can be more or less challenging. And they don't sometimes think of it as an issue of integrity. Well, that putt didn't count. That's very common to hear that in putt-putt golf. It's very common to hear that on the golf course too, by the way. That shot didn't count, or that putt didn't count. They all count technically. So let me compare that, though, with another story, and you'll see what I'm talking about here. This is from ESPN, written by Jeff Bradley, and this was published, this goes back to April 19th, 2011. Headline, Brian Davis taught us integrity, honesty. Beginning the quote here. Just to extend his sudden death playoff another hole at last year's Verizon Heritage Classic, Brian Davis was going to have to run in a 35-foot downhill putt for par, or hope somehow that Jim Furyk would three-putt from just off the green. Long odds, to say the least, for this fairly anonymous Englishman who had played on the PGA Tour since 2007. But what Davis did in defeat last April 18th in Hilton Head resonated with people across the country and around the world. Quote within a quote. Maybe because we were coming off things like the Bernard Madoff scandal and some other acts of dishonesty, Davis wondered aloud. Maybe because the news is filled with so many negative stories. There wasn't much good going on at the time. So, what I did became a feel-good story for a lot of people. Continuing the story, before he even walked to the green to line up that long putt, Davis called over the rules official, Slugger White, and asked him to review the video of his previous shot, which he played out of a hazard. Quoting him again, he said, "I didn't feel anything," Davis said, "but I saw something." Indeed, he did. Though it was invisible to the naked eye, undetectable on the first replay, and still impossible to see in slow motion. When viewed in super slow-mo, David ticked a reed in his backswing. Since a reed is what's known as a loose impediment, it can therefore not be moved. It's Rule 23 in the USGA's Rules of Golf, and Davis knew it. A two-stroke penalty for something no one would ever have seen. Game over. Quoting him again here, Brian Davis, he says, "Friends said to me, that penalty cost you $400,000, Davis recalls. And I said, no, it probably cost me more like $2 million. A win would have gotten me into the Masters. My endorsement bonuses would have kicked in. A win opens so many doors. All of a sudden, I'd be in the world events like the SBS with guaranteed money. There's no price you could put on it. It cost me $400,000 on that Sunday, but how much did it really cost me? Who knows? Winning at the Verizon Heritage would have been awesome. Probably the hardest thing is knowing how much a win can possibly change your career. No one saw it. You couldn't detect it on slow motion video. You couldn't. The first time as they just watched to see what happened, you couldn't see anything happen. The only person who knew something happened was the player himself. And in golf, you call your own score. You call your own fouls. You call your own penalties. It's a game of integrity. And this young man demonstrated rare integrity because he didn't put price over his integrity. He didn't put his future over integrity. He knew the rules. He agreed to play by the rules. And because of that, when he knew, and he knew in his heart that he had fouled, he called that foul on himself. That penalty cost him 2 strokes, and it cost him that tournament. I sit back and I think about that, and I think, wow, that's truly someone of integrity. That's the highest ideals of sports, is that we would compete with one another with integrity. That should be the highest ideal of our life, that we should work together with integrity. I want to talk about integrity. What does integrity mean? According to Merriam-Webster's online dictionary, it means firm adherence to a code of especially moral or artistic values. Incorruptibility. Here's some synonyms for integrity: character, decency, goodness, honesty, morality, probity, rectitude, righteousness, rightness, uprightness, virtue, virtuousness. You see, a thing with integrity does what it's created to do. So, for example, if you build a ship, If that ship floats as it's designed to do and it doesn't sink, that ship is said to have integrity. Its hull has integrity. Okay? In the same way, God built us to operate a certain way. And when we operate that way, that's called integrity. He gives us a set of rules, a set of boundaries, and when we operate correctly within those boundaries, we're said to have integrity. It's a code of conduct that we adhere to. An honest man keeps his word, and in doing so proves he has integrity. Integrity is action in demonstrating our morals, values, and beliefs. Brian, in action, demonstrating his morals, values, and beliefs by penalizing himself at great personal cost. Let me give you some famous quotes. Quote, in looking for people to hire, you look for three qualities: integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if they don't have the first, the other two don't matter. That's from Warren Buffett. Lewis Cass says, people may doubt what you say, but they will believe what you do. Carl Jung says, you are what you do, not what you say you will do. You know, Solomon's book of wisdom in the Proverbs testifies that integrity guides a person's life. Proverbs chapter 11. And I'll read here just one verse, Proverbs 11, verse 3. The integrity of the upright will guide them, but the perversity of the unfaithful will destroy them. So integrity guides our life. It's how we make our choices. I have a code of conduct, and I'm going to follow that code of conduct no matter what. My integrity depends upon that. And so that's how I look at life. That's how I look at the decisions that I have to make before me. I have to look at them through that lens of what is that code of conduct that I have agreed to, and I'm going to stick to it no matter what. And Solomon reminds us later in Proverbs chapter 20 that God blesses those with integrity. Proverbs 20 and verse 7. Verse 7 says, the righteous man walks in his integrity. His children are blessed after him. Isn't that, as parents, you're like, that's what I want. I want my kids to have a good life and to be blessed and be taken care of. And I want my life to be a blessing to them. And here Solomon's saying your life will be a blessing to your children if you're a person of integrity. Teach your children integrity through your actions. Be a person of integrity. And it has to be worth more than anything. We have a wonderful example from Brian showing us that it's worth more than a whole lot that was sitting right in front of him. But back to Proverbs chapter 19, just one page over for me. Proverbs chapter 19, in the very first verse, says, better is the poor who walks in his integrity than one who is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Look, it's better if we don't have wealth, but we still have our integrity. Better not to compromise in this life, to have something, and to have compromised our integrity to have that thing. So Solomon's quite wise on the value here of integrity and how important we should be viewing integrity in our life. It should be like the pinnacle of our character, the determination of our spirit. I will do what I say. I'm a man of integrity, and I will hold my integrity, my code of values, my morals, my values, and my ethics, and my beliefs. I will hold those, and I will be true to them. That is integrity. In fact, Psalms says this even better. Psalms chapter 15. Psalms chapter 15. And I'll read verses 1 through 5 at least. Yes, 1 through 5. So Psalms chapter 15, it's actually the whole passage, so that's not going to be hard. All of Psalms 15. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? Well, this is the pinnacle of achievement of our life, isn't it? To be in God's kingdom. And he says in verse 2, he who walks uprightly and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He who does not backbite with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor does he take up a reproach against a friend, in whose eyes a vile person is despised. But he honors those who fear the Lord. He swears to his own hurt and does not change. He who does not put out his money at usury, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent, he who does these things shall never be moved. This is a person of integrity. Interesting phrasing, though, isn't it? He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. We began with that story of the golfer who, when he agreed to play in the tournament, agreed to play by a set of rules. And when you sign that card at the end of that tournament, that is essentially your oath. I have, and I validate, that that this card is 100% true. There is nothing false about it. I didn't cheat when I saw myself hit that reed. I called that foul on myself because it was true. So that's what integrity is. He swore an oath to his hurt. He could have just let that go. Probably would have won the tournament. May have won the tournament. I mean, Jim Furyk was probably going to make that birdie and win. But still, the possibility that he wins the tournament was real, and he had to weigh that. And again, that's the kind of thing. It's hard for us maybe to imagine what it means to swear to our own hurt and not change, even though it harms us. If to follow through on a commitment, perhaps when it's really inconvenient to do so, something better comes along, or it just is very painful to follow through on what you said you would do. It just is what it is. In terms of the value of our integrity, it should not matter to us. I said I would do it. Integrity is when you do what you say you'll do. And that's what Scripture's helping us to illustrate and to understand. So I appreciate that very much. Let me quote here from Macomb School of Business at the University of Texas on the subject of integrity. Quote, "Acting with integrity means understanding, accepting, and choosing to live in accordance with one's principles, which will include honesty, fairness, and decency. A person of integrity will consistently demonstrate good character by being free of corruption and hypocrisy. Integrity is revealed when people act virtuously regardless of circumstance or consequences. This often requires moral courage. Indeed, integrity is the critical connection between ethics and moral action." For the remainder of this message today, that's it, end quote there. For the remainder of this message, I want to walk through the 4 enemies of integrity that are most commonly understood. In other words, I did a broad research of what are the enemies of integrity? What can undermine our integrity and potentially cause us to compromise? And there's generally 4 enemies that commonly seem to be identified. And I want to just touch on those. And I'm not saying this is a definitive list of the enemies of integrity, but I am saying that these 4 things came up pretty commonly, and I want to just use these 4 to help us to see spiritually how to apply these things in our life as enemies against our integrity. Now, as I walk through each 4 of these, I do want it to be clear that it's not that you might find yourself battling one or another or another or another. We could be influenced by multiple. So I think that's why it's a good idea for us to look at all 4 of them, and then at any given time ask ourselves, am I guilty of any one of these or more than one of these? Or am I at risk here of compromising my integrity because of one or more of these enemies of integrity? The first enemy I want to talk about is self-deception. Self-deception in this case, specifically, is a refusal to see things clearly. A refusal to see things clearly. You know, pride is the biggest and most dangerous enemy to integrity. The prophet Jeremiah was inspired to record a fundamental truth for us over in Jeremiah chapter 17. Jeremiah chapter 17 and verse 9. "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? We're constantly fighting this thing here called our heart. In this case, heart is our human nature. And our human nature is very self-absorbed. It's that thing Paul described in Romans 7 that our spiritual nature battles against. Our heart, our human nature, it desires what it desires. And we fight it constantly. It's deceitful. And when we become self-deceived, it's because we've allowed ourselves to be deceived by our own heart. In warning Edom of their pending destruction, God revealed that they were self-deceived. Their hearts deceived them. It's what you want to believe. Of course, it's what your human nature wants you to believe. Over in Obadiah, not a book that we go to all that regularly. Obadiah, it's only one book with 21 verses in it. But Obadiah 1 and verse 3, here God's talking to Edom, who is sitting in the clefts of the rocks and who thinks no one can touch us. But he says here in verse 2, "Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be greatly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock." So, their location made them believe no one can touch us. We're sitting high here. We're untouchable. After all the evil that they had done, and God said, "Sorry, kids, I'm going to show you that's not true." But they're self-deceived. Who can touch us? No one, they're saying to themselves. We are untouchable. Not to God. Not to God. And again, Paul warns us over in the book of Proverbs, one more time here in Proverbs. But there's many things here that the book of Proverbs tells us and teaches us about character and certainly about integrity. In Proverbs chapter 16, Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 18, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Well, Edom ultimately fell. Satan, whose pride lifted him up, who ascended above the stars of heaven to try to overthrow the throne of God and put himself as God is, to make himself God, was thrown down. Pride goes before the destruction. He was arrogant in his pride to believe that he could do such a thing. And of course, James, the brother of Jesus, in our New Testament, James chapter 1, and verse 22, James chapter 1 and verse 22 says, "Be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves." You can't just hear and then tell yourself, "I'm a believer," without doing. Doing validates what we say when we say we believe. So there's no such thing as believing without doing. The world's filled with people that are doing that. They say, "Yes, I accept Jesus." This is a terrible example, but it's true. I accept Jesus and into my heart and as my personal Savior. And so that alone means that I can go on about my life the way that it was. I don't have to change. I don't have to do anything different. Jesus now lives in me. Well, if I look at your life and it's a train wreck because, you're doing all kinds of things you're not supposed to do, that you should know better than, and you stand on this whole, but I believe, I think you might find yourself in that category of people where Christ says, "I don't know who you are." Hearing without doing is self-deception. That's what James is saying. When it comes to our integrity, it is self-deception that allows us to rationalize our behavior when we compromise on our integrity. When you know deep down you're not supposed to do something and you do it anyway, if you allow yourself to be self-deceived, then you find yourself rationalizing that decision. Well, but this is what makes it okay. This is what makes it okay. The antidote to self-deception is self-reflection. Let's drop down here in James chapter 1 to verse 23, and we'll read through verse 25. James 1, 23 through 25. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he's like a man observing his natural face in a mirror. For he observes himself, I see, goes away and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to live my life. And when I'm confronted with things that might cause me to compromise on my integrity, if I haven't overcome self-deception, I'm going to rationalize that compromise. But he says here in verse 5, but he who looks into the perfect law of liberty and continues in it, and is not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the work, this one will be blessed in what he does. You know, you say, I believe in God, and I'm going to do what he says all year long until I get to this thing, whatever my thing is. And that thing is so important to me that I can allow myself to be self-deceived that, well, it's not really against God. And he's saying, you have to look into the perfect law of liberty. If you don't see approval to do a thing here in the scriptures, in these words that come from God, or if you find words in here that says that, I'm sorry, that's an out-of-bound activity, or that thing you want to do, that's just not right. God says you will, that would be an offense to him. But instead of rationalizing, it says, look into these words. If God says no, then it's no. That's why integrity takes moral character. You have to say finally, at the end of the day, okay, while this may be even soul-crushing to me, I know it's right, and so I will do it. I'm going to do what God wants, not what I want. I'm not going to rationalize doing what I want. I'm going to do what God wants. It's very difficult for us to get there, and it can take a long time. But God is saying that the antidote to self-deception, that justification that says, yeah, but I'm not doing things for that reason. I'm not doing it because I hate God. I'm not doing it because it's a compromise on my values. But if God sees it that way, then he's telling us, you need to step back, take a look at yourself through this process. Look at what I say in my words and do what I want, not what you want. Don't compromise. Very difficult. Super, super hard to do. But that's what he's asking us to do. Look through the Word of God and convict ourselves on what we're supposed to be doing, and then don't compromise. Okay, the second enemy I'm identifying here, and these aren't in any particular batting order, they're just 4 enemies I'm identifying here today. Self-interest. This is the desire to have what we want. So as I said, you can begin. If you want it bad enough, you might allow yourself to be self-deceived in order to justify compromising. So you can see that you can be suffering from more than one thing. But what is this issue? The desire for the things we want. Self-interest is in and of itself is not wrong. So I don't want to leave that with the impression that you have no business taking care of the self. That's clearly wrong. Look what Paul says in the book of Philippians. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 4. Philippians chapter 2 and verse 4, where Paul says, always, did I get that right? Philippians 2 and verse 4. Well, if you get to Philippians 2, that would help. Oh, here it is. He says, let each of you look out not only for his interests, but also for the interests of others. Okay, you have a responsibility to take care of the self. And by extension, your families, and to the extent that you have the ability, other people as well. There's a right way to take care of yourself. Okay, so you have to provide food and clothing and shelter. And if you've got kids, you've got to provide for them. And if you have a spouse, you have to provide for them. And you have to work together as a family. So you have to take care of yourselves. That's what he's talking about. But he's setting a boundary on that. Like taking care of yourselves no matter what the cost is. Generally, I think this tends to lean into the what is needed. That might go from what is needed to what is wanted. And that's where I think we have to be very on guard when we start to place the wants as equal to the needs. And we're very likely in that case to compromise on our integrity when we do that. This is actually, so what he's really talking about then is selfishness. And that is, of course, the way of this world. Selfishness is the way of this world. And it comes from the spirit of this world, which is Satan. Luke chapter 12. We live in a world where the joke is, especially amongst the secularists, those who don't particularly place God above all things. The joke amongst most secularists is he who ends with the most toys wins. And that's sort of the sense of what we're talking about here. There are far more things than the gaining or the obtaining or the collecting of things. And that's what Christ wanted us to know in Luke chapter 12 here, beginning at verse 13. Luke chapter 12, beginning at verse 13. And I'll read through 15. Luke 12:13. Then one from the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Christ said to him, "Man, who made me judge or an arbiter over you? What do I have to do with what's going on between you and your brother?" And he said to them, "Take heed and beware of covetousness," which was what the situation was apparently going on there. See, if the older brother inherits and the younger brother is envious of that, covetousness can creep right in real quick. "Take heed and beware of covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses." Routinely, Christ kept telling us, stop worrying about the things that you want. Your Father will take care of your needs, and he will bless you in some of those wants if you put him first. And so when we put ourselves first, we're far more likely to make a compromise in the area of self-interest. Okay? When we put God first, we put God first truly. And I hope this isn't speculation. The story, I think, bears out what I'm about to say, that this was the problem of Ananias and Sapphira that you read about in Acts. This story is in Acts chapter 5 and begins in verse 1. And I'll tell you why I think that's the case. I think I can make a real good case here that this is what's really going on between Ananias and Sapphira. You kind of want to have both things. I want a reputation and I want my things. Acts chapter 5. This is a fledgling church right now. We're right at the beginning. And so because of that, I think God is particularly sensitive about how people behave in this brand new church Jesus Christ had just built. We begin here with Acts chapter 5 and verse 1. But a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira, his wife, sold a possession. And it says, and he kept back part of the proceeds. His wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself? While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You've not lied to men, but to God. Then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So great fear came upon all those who heard these things. And the young men arose and wrapped him up, and carried him out, and buried him. Now, it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter said to her, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, yes, for so much. Then Peter said to her, how is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Then immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men came and found her dead, and carrying her out, buried her by her husband. This is an interesting story. It appears from the context of the story that Ananias and Sapphira owned a piece of land. They donated the value of that land to the new church. But imagine, if you will, under this, the challenge of I want what I want, this self-interest, this selfishness that is the proclivity of our human condition. Imagine that you thought that land was worth one thing. Let's say that they thought that land was worth $10,000. And to them, let's say that $10,000 wasn't particularly much. I'm trying to put it in modern terms. Not a lot. We don't really think the land's worth all that much. Meaning, I don't know that we could do a whole lot to it to make it worth more than it is. So let's just donate that. I mean, we don't really care about it, do we? Yeah, no, but we'll look good when we turn it in, won't we? Yeah. Okay, so let's do that. And so they put it on the market. And the realtor comes back and says, well, you know what? Recently there's been some zoning changes, and that land went from, $10,000 to, $200,000. It's worth quite a bit more. You imagine your eyes bugging out when you go $200,000. Well, I can envision them saying, but when we were going to give that to them, it was only worth $10,000. So let's give them $10,000, and then we'll just keep the rest. But is that what you said you'd do? You see how easy it is for us to justify making a change? Well, what we said we'd do is we said we'd give the value. But is that what you said you'd do? Because in my mind, what you said you'd do is you'd give the land and the proceeds from the sale of the land. And if that's what you said you would do, and you said that to the church and you said that to God, God holds you to that. And when they came back and said, well, here's the value of the land, when we thought it was only worth $10,000, we didn't say that out loud. And so you held back $190,000. And God said, sorry, this is a brand new church. Look what he says in verse 11. Why do you think he did this? I believe it's because of verse 11. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. God wanted everyone to know that integrity matters. Integrity matters in his church. You're accountable for your word. I expect you to be a person of integrity and to do what you say, even if it costs you. Why didn't they have the attitude, I can't believe this is worth this much to the church? What a blessing for God's people. Different attitude, isn't it? Different spirit behind those two things, and it cost them their lives. The third enemy I want to cover in this Bible study is self-preservation. Now, this is different. The desire to not lose what we have, including our life or our property. The desire to not lose. In particular, if it's going to hurt badly, me personally, to do this thing, kind of like as we started with that, to swear to your hurt sort of a thing. But what about when my life is in peril? I think about the example of Abraham back in Genesis chapter 20. And I think God wanted this recorded so that we would see that there isn't any of us that are perfect. The heroes we might identify in the Bible, which truly have great and tremendous position in the Bible, and wonderful things said about them by God, they've got warts, spiritual warts. And those warts are there to help us to see and to understand that if we're not where we should be, we can change. Here's an example of somebody suffering from this third type of self-preservation. And he made a compromise to his integrity based on self-preservation. Genesis chapter 20, verses 1 and 2. Genesis 20, beginning here in verse 1. And Abraham journeyed from there to the south, and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur, and stayed in Gerar. Now Abraham said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Sarah was his wife. Half-sister, but wife. Which one is first? Sister or wife? It's wife. So he says, no, well, I'm going to go with sister first. Why? Well, it's not the first time this has happened. Go back to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 13. Now there was a famine in the land. And this is when he was Abram. So he's had a while to learn this lesson. Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. And it came to pass when he was close to entering Egypt that he said to Sarai, now see, this is before either one of them was renamed. He said to Sarai, his wife, indeed I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. Therefore it will happen when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, this is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please say you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you, not because of God. Fear is driving the bus here. Faith would have said, I trust in God. Fear is driving the bus here. But I will be saved, Sarai, because of you, not because of God. We can be guilty of the same kind of justifications, where we let fear drive the bus, and fear causes us to make a decision that compromises our integrity. Some people, it might be the Sabbath. I'm afraid of losing my job. Maybe if I just work a couple of hours. Sorry, a compromise is a compromise. The first time you do it, the world knows. You don't actually mean it then, do you? You don't really believe in keeping the Sabbath, do you? That's a real challenge. So we go back to the latter account here, chapter 20. Genesis chapter 20 again. In the latter account with Abimelech, which we started with, being an eastern king, having a harem of wives was normal. Sure. Abimelech did not believe he had done anything wrong, and thus in his heart he was innocent. He had acted with his integrity. You know what? God did not deny this. Verse 3 of chapter 20. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man, because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. But Abimelech had not come near her. He hadn't touched her yet. And he said, Lord, will you slay a righteous nation also? Did he, Abraham, not say to me, she is my sister? And she, even she herself said, he is my brother. So they both lied. They both told a half-truth. Neither one of them said, that's our spouse. In the integrity of my heart and innocence of my hands, I have done this. I thought she was a sister and that she was free. And thus I took her. And I have not touched her yet. And God said to him, no, it wasn't any integrity issues. You don't have any integrity here. That's not what he said. He said, yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. For I also withheld you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife. For he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours. Okay. So this is a story. This is an illustration by Abraham's example of how we can compromise on our values out of fear. Of course, if we read a little bit further in the story, dropping down here to verse 10, it's a really interesting question because it's what we would ask. Then Abimelech said to Abraham, what did you have in view that you have done this thing? We would ask the same question. What were you thinking? Like, you have the God of gods, that God who talked to me in a dream and told me I was a dead man if I touched your wife. You have him on your side and you still hid like that she was your wife? I don't understand this. Abimelech, in his integrity, could not understand Abraham compromising on this. Verse 11, it says, and Abraham said, because I thought surely the fear of God is not in this place. Abimelech would have certainly thought, what does that matter? And they will kill me on account of my wife. But indeed, she is truly my sister. She is the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came to pass, when God caused me to wander from my father's house, that I said to her, this is your kindness that you should do for me in every place wherever we go. Say of me, he is my brother. Fear. Fear is driving the bus. And that, of course, is an enemy to integrity. It caused Abraham to compromise. In the same way, it can cause us to compromise. So we have to be on guard for the self-interest, the fear that would allow us, the fear of losing, the fear of punishment, the fear of whatever that would allow us to compromise on our integrity. We cannot allow that to happen. Okay, the fourth and final one that I want to cover is self-righteousness. This one's a little trickier. The end justifies the means. The outcome justifies the method. The end justifies the means. The danger of self-righteousness is that you believe that you are right based on your own opinion. It's the belief that what I think is right is in fact right. It places our ideas and our opinions above God's. You know, as we close out the book of Judges, we have a description of this condition. Judges chapter 21. Judges chapter 21. I'll read it, verse 25, if you've beaten me there. Last scripture in the book of Judges, 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Not hard to see that the world today does that. People come to all kinds of really interesting, fantastical ideas that don't seem to have any connection to the truth or any sort of reality. I mean, if you don't wake up today, and see the news and wonder if there's two worlds we live in, a world that person is describing and the world that I live in, like those don't seem to be the same world. I don't know how we can be living in the same world and see it this diametrically different from each other. Well, self-righteousness. We all we're all potentially threatened with the idea that what I think is right is actually right, which would mean that I set the standard for what right is, but I don't set the standard for what right is. But if I did, how can I be wrong if I do something? So if I look at a situation and I say, this is the outcome that I'm looking for. Now, I might have to do something like this. Maybe that compromises my integrity a little bit, but here's the thing. The outcome is so good, it would be worth a small compromise here to get that outcome. And because I get to define what good is, then I can justify doing whatever it is. The end justifies. The end, that outcome justifies the means to obtain it. That's really what self-righteousness is here as an enemy of our integrity. It puts the outcome above our morals, our values, and our beliefs. The ends justifies the means approach is dangerous and corrosive to our character. You know the story of Balaam and Balak, but Balaam in particular, but it's his interaction with Balak against the children of Israel that illustrates for us sort of what happens when the ends, what I want, justifies the means. What I deem as good justifies the means. Because Balaam constantly fought against God in the story of Balaam versus Balak, or Balaam and Balak. That's over in Numbers chapter 22. I want to just touch on this here as we wrap up this Bible study. Numbers chapter 22. We'll read through verse 24 here initially. 22, 1 through 4. Then the children of Israel moved and encamped in the plains of Moab on the side of the Jordan across from Jericho. So they were on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and they were collecting, gathering, and preparing to cross the Jordan now to take and to go into the promised land. Now Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites, and Moab was exceedingly afraid of the people because they were many, and Moab was sick with dread because of the children of Israel. Meaning all of the people were terrified. So Moab said to the elders of Midian, now this company will lick up everything around us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of the Moabites at that time. And so he's talking to the smaller tribes of Midian. And he's saying, hey, listen, this people, we stand no chance here. We're going to be wiped out. We saw what they did to the Amorites. We know the history of them coming out of Egypt. that this people like locusts will just consume the land, and we will be consumed and destroyed in the process. We've got to do something. We have to do something. Carrying on down here now in verses 5 through 6, where he says, Then he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the sons of the people, to call him, saying, Look, a people has come from Egypt. See, they cover the face of the earth and are settling next to me. Therefore, please come at once. Curse this people for me, for they are too many for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and whom you curse is cursed. So, look, Balaam was known as a diviner or a soothsayer in the land. And apparently he had had success in this role. Balaam is acknowledging that we know this by reputation of you. And because of that, he's going to send him, money. So, look, think about in terms of the context of this. If you wanted to know, should we go left or right, and you wanted to, if you were a pagan tribe, any one of those Gentile tribes, you would have gone to a soothsayer or a diviner. You have to bring a fee. And we have a story of that in the Bible. You can easily track that down. I don't have time to go into it. But you bring a diviner's fee. And certainly, if we see here in verse 7, so the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian departed with the diviner's fee in their hand, and they came to Balaam and spoke to him the words of Balak. So they had the fee in hand. Now, here's the thing. Small request, small fee. Big request, much more expected in the fee. Okay? So this would have had to have been, what they were about to request from him would have had to have been an eye-popping amount of money, because this isn't, answer me the question, should we go left or should we go right? This was, come and curse the people of God. So as I can't read the whole story, so I'm going to have to just snippet this for you as we wrap up. But as he inquired of God, or as God inquired with Balaam what he was up to with these people, he told Balaam that the Israelites were under his protection. So you would read that next. God says to Balaam, okay, here, hang on here, partner. This people is under my protection and they enjoy my blessing. You shall not curse them. In fact, I do not want you to go back with them at all. So Balaam sent them back without going with them. I'm just giving you the cliff notes here. So Balaam says, okay. So he goes to them and he says, look, God has said to me that I cannot go with you and I cannot curse the people of Israel. I'm sorry. I got to let all that money go. That's really what he's saying. This was a real payday for me, but God is literally telling me I'm not going to be able to cash in on this thing. However, drop down to verse 16. But they came to Balaam and said to him, well, let's go verse 15. Then Balak again sent princes more numerous and more honorable than the first. And they came to Balaam and said to him, Thus says Balak, the son of Zippor, please let nothing hinder you from coming to me. For I will certainly honor you greatly, and I will do whatever you say to me. Therefore, please curse this people for me. You can see dollar signs rolling around in his eyeball, like the old cartoons, right? This is a huge payday. How do I get this? So Balaam answered and said to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me, get this, his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more. Now, therefore, please also stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me. He's throwing out, really up to the entire house of Balaam or Balak filled with silver and gold? Well, clearly no one's saying. My guess here is the answer is if that's what you want. So here goes the dollar signs again. So Balaam is saying, okay, hang on. Stay the night. I'm going to go talk to God again. Double check with him. I'm sure we can work something out. Well, here's the thing. God... So Balaam, as we can see here, Balaam was negotiating. He wanted to negotiate this whole thing. But God said, no, you're not to go with them. But here's the thing. He told Balaam, if they ask you to go with them, then go ahead and go with them, but you will speak the words that I tell you to speak. So what happened in the morning? He said, Balaam gets up and he mounts his donkey, and he just leaves with them. Well, this makes God mad, and so he sends the angel of the Lord. And if we study our scriptures, we know that the angel of the Lord is the Word. He stands not yet visible, but the donkey knows he's there. And, of course, this is when we have the episode of the donkey turning about and Balaam whipping the donkey 3 times and getting mad and so forth. But this story ends as this, okay? Verse 34. This particular portion of the story ends here at verse 34, where he says, and Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned, for I did not know you stood in the way against me. Now, therefore, if it displeases you, I will turn back. Okay, you caught me. You're right. I'm sorry. Obviously, I'm busted. I wanted to go. I did everything I could to go. And here I am blaming my donkey for not letting me go. And all the while, it was you standing against me, and I didn't even know. Well, do you have a relationship with God? It doesn't sound like it, Balaam. It does not sound like you actually have a great relationship with God. You're not listening to him, because every time he says no, you try to do it anyway. Why? The ends justify the means. I got to have this money. Money, 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 money. Yeah, the old song. Anyway. So God's trying to tell him the ends do not justify the means. But God decided to use Balaam to curse the Moabites and the Midianites. And so he gave him permission to go on with them. Now, chapters 23 and 24 detail the 3 cursings called the oracles that Balaam pronounced on Moab and Midian from God. Afterwards, Balaam departs from Balak. So he goes, he never curses, he only blesses. Both him and Balak are frustrated. And so it looks like they separate. And that's the last we hear of it. Except as the rest of the story unfolds, we see at the beginning of chapter 25 that the Israelites camped. So I'm not going to read that for you, but I want you to read it on your own. Chapter 25, the Israelites had camped nearby. So this is where they were camped on that side of on the east side of the Jordan. In that area, they were camped. Okay, so they hadn't moved from there. And they began to commit adultery with the women of Moab and Midian. This was great cause of an event where Phinehas went in and killed the prince of Simeon, who wed himself to a princess. Phinehas killed the prince of Simeon, yes, who went and wed himself to a princess of Midian, and who brought her into the camp of Israel. Now, how did that come to pass? How did all of that come to pass, where we started to see the women of Moab and Midian enticing and dragging off, so to speak, spiritually, the men of Israel? Well, over in Numbers 31, again, I don't have time to do a real deep dive on this, but in Numbers chapter 31, in verse 16, Numbers 31:16 says, look, these women, well, Burke in verse 15, Israel had wiped out Moab and Midian. And what does it say in verse 15? And Moses said to them, have you kept all the women alive? Why did he mention the women? Look, these women, in verse 16, caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord, and this is the plague that was stopped by the staff. So this is when Phinehas killed the prince of Simeon and the princess of Midian. And so God is saying, how did that happen? Well, Mr. Self-Righteous back there, the one who just couldn't let it go, though God would not allow him to curse, he showed Balak how he could entice the sons of Israel to commit spiritual fornication by sexual fornication with the women of Moab and Midian. And of course, this worked. And of course, a curse happened. Now, there were enough righteous, so to speak, in Israel that God was, that were able to persuade God through their prayers and beseechments to not destroy Israel. But that is what Balak was hoping for, that they would destroy themselves. In fact, just to put a button on this, Balaam is famous and not forgotten throughout history, because if we go to Revelation chapter 2, this way that Balaam of his thinking isn't new. And God warns the churches, the church today, about this. Compromising our spiritual values, being enticed away spiritually. Revelation 2:14, he's talking to the church at Pergamos, and he says here in verse 14, "But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel." False teachers in the church deceiving the brethren, teaching them the wrong way to worship God. False teachings. And God's calling that out. That is a reality of the future, of our time potentially. Certainly before the end times, that this is a very serious reality that we must be on guard for in the church. And if you look around, it's not hard for some of us to identify a fair amount of self-righteousness in and out of the church. And we've got to be on guard for it, because it can be what deceives us, what allows us to fall away. This belief that I know what's right, whether or not it agrees with God or not. I was asked a question at the feast about what's right, and I was talking to an individual who had a legitimate question of concern over a very settled issue in Scripture. And when I said to the person, "This is your answer," they pushed back. It's as though they don't want that answer. It's hard to know what to do with that. My encouragement would be, please go back and on your knees read the Scriptures again. Please read the Scriptures and do it prayerfully and ask God to open your mind to let you see. Don't let self-righteousness cause you to compromise on the truth. It's very important principles for us to understand. We have to maintain our integrity, our strict adherence to the morals and values, ethics and beliefs that we've been given by God. We have to hold fast to those. And in order to do that, we need to be aware of what the enemies of our integrity are. Self-deception, self-interest, self-preservation, and self-righteousness. Those are the enemies of integrity. And we need to be on guard for those. Today, perhaps more than ever, our integrity matters. Let's be sure, brethren, to preserve it.